What's going on, everybody? The No-Huddle Show, our hot take pod. Unfortunately, no Joe today, but don't worry, me and Matt are here. And Matt, it's been one long flight back from Dallas and about 36 hours since the Eagles essentially captured the NFC East with their blowout win of the Cowboys. Obviously, plenty to get into today. We touched on a lot of things after the show, but on Sunday. But now that we've had more time, we have a ton of reader questions, so I'm excited to get into those. But I'll kind of start it off like Joe does every episode for our Tuesday episodes. What are some of your bigger takeaways from the game? Because, I mean, obviously we talked about how Wentz played. We talked about Darby. We talked about, how they're clearly the best team in the NFC. But maybe after a little more time to let the game sink in and a chance to rewatch it, what are some of your other takeaways from the blowout?
Yeah, Elliot, I think that this just underscores that the Eagles are the team to beat. And I don't want to get into too much about, who they have to beat and what those other teams have done. But you just look at what they did on Sunday night, right? And you look at Carson Wentz, the dichotomy of his first half versus his second half. His QB rating in the first half was something around 55. Second half, it was 150. Now, obviously, they asked him to do a lot less in the second half. The running game really took over. Jay Ajayi had the big 71-yard bust-out run. But like I said on Sunday night, and I think you agree with this, Elliot, is that I think they checked another box on Sunday night. When you start to look at what great teams, Super Bowl caliber teams are able to do, they won that game when Carson Wentz wasn't at his best. They showed the offensive line can be dominant. And DeMarcus Lawrence is still one of the top edge rushers in the league. Lane Johnson kept him at bay. They didn't give up a sack. They ran the ball 215 yards on the ground. The defense scored a touchdown, forced multiple turnovers. Derek Barnett took up residence in the Cowboys' backfield. And all year we've talked about how this team has been so dominant because Wentz has been so dynamic. I think we saw a complete team victory once again. Sure, it was an inferior opponent and a banged-up opponent, but it's still an NFC East rival. It's still on the road. I don't know that I could be more impressed by what they were able to do on Sunday night and what we both think it means moving forward.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway with more time to, watch it again and all that is Derek Barnett is really good. I mean,
Yep.
This guy absolutely dominated the Cowboys, and he played about half the snaps against the Cowboys, and that number I think is only going to go up. I'm not saying he's better than Brandon Graham or Vinny Curry at this point. Well, he's probably maybe better than Vinny Curry, but at very least, it's not that far off. One of my biggest concerns about Barnett when they first took him coming out of college, and it was the concern of, all the scouting reports and scouts I talked to and such, was if he'll be a good enough athlete to deal with offensive tackles in the NFL. And obviously he was playing some backups against the Cowboys, but I mean, the athletic question I think has been completely thrown out the window. I mean, he is just getting around guys, he's overpowering them, and it's the hustle. And I think sometimes when you read scouting reports on guys and it's like, oh, he loves the game or he really hustles,
Yeah.
it can seem like, all right, well, whatever, they're just saying that. But you can really see it with Barnett. I mean, he finishes each play to the end of the whistle. He's great against the run, which is from a defensive end standpoint is mostly hustle and will. So I think, obviously the win was big and all that, but my biggest takeaway from the game was not only do the Eagles have a great defensive player in Barnett, they're gonna have to do something next year he's got to start. He's got to be out on
Right.
the field as much as possible because he just creates havoc every time he's out there.
Yeah, I
And
think there's a very good chance Vinny Curry is gone next year because of the play of Derek Barnett. And I remember talking to Eagles offensive linemen after rookie minicamp and after the first full team minicamp, and they said that his the way his ankle bends at the top of the rush to get around offensive tackles, whether it's Lane Johnson or Jason Peters, two of the best in the NFL, that it was as good as either one of these guys had ever seen. And let's remember, this is a guy that played in the SEC. This is a guy that broke Reggie White's sack record at Tennessee. And I remember being excited about the pick at the time. And we've done shows where it's been slow to build in terms of his playing time. But he played starter caliber snaps along with Chris Long on Sunday night. And I think that was kind of a glimpse, not necessarily the Chris Long side of things, but I think Jim Schwartz and I think that the defensive line coaches and that the coaching staff has really seen enough out of Barnett where they can trust him to go out there and contribute as a starter. And that was his second multi-sack game. He had a huge night, and he was integral on that Dak Prescott sack fumble that Nigel
right.
Bradham returned for a touchdown.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the other piece of news, I think, well, two things. One, I want to get into the Jake Elliott situation because that's kind of the big news from the game. But another interesting tidbit I just thought of that I think we should talk about was prior to the game on Sunday, Dave Spadaro of the Eagles website was doing a radio interview, I believe, on 94 WIP. And he said, they were talking about the Jernigan extension. And he said, well, something to the effect of, it looks like someone else. He thinks someone else is going to get extended in season. So I think we talked about it a little in the press box. Who do you think that is, and who do you think it should be?
I think it could be one of two or three players, and I'm not going to name the one because I think this is the one that you think that all signs are pointing to.
Yeah.
But I think there's a chance it could be Brandon Graham because they cashed up Tim Jernigan. They took care of Fletcher Cox a year ago, and I think that they're not necessarily headed for a stare down with Brandon Graham, but I don't know that he's going to be happy going into next offseason playing on his deal based on his production. Pro Football Focus has him rated as one of the top 10 or 15 defensive ends in football. I don't know that you're going to get a happy Brandon Graham going into next year. I think there's a chance it could be him, and I also think there's
That's
a
an
chance
interesting
it could be,
one. I didn't think about that one. That is interesting though, because I do think we just talked about Barnett a little, and obviously like how he needs to be on the field more this season, really, but also next season. So it'll be interesting to see what they did with Brandon Graham. I mean, I think he's a guy who definitely won around. He was voted a captain. He's a very strong defensive end. Another thing I'll say is like, even though we think Barnett should play more, the fact that this team is so deep at defensive line and can rotate these guys in and out is huge. So, you can say, all right, well, if you lose Brandon Graham, you still have Derek Barnett. But, you want guys to shuffle in and out. Like Chris Long maybe hasn't had a great statistical season, but he's been an integral part of that defensive line, just in the way that he gives, Graham a break. He gives Curry a break. You can put him in there and trust him. So Graham would be a very interesting one. My only reason I wouldn't think it might be him is I agree with you. He won't be happy. But
he's still a bargain.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he's still a bargain. He makes, I think, $6 or $7 million next year. And I'm wondering if they'll just, and this is like a savage business move, but if they'll just call his bluff and I mean, I think we both know, Brandon.
He's not going to hold out, right? He's
well,
not going to.
I think he might threaten to hold out and he might do it, but he doesn't strike me as a guy that's going to stay away, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think he would really stick it out. And I don't mean that as an insult to him, but I just think he loves being around in the locker room. He loves being around his teammates. So I think, I mean, I would extend Brandon Graham, but that'll be my only counter to whether I think that's going to
be. Financially, it might not be the savviest of moves. One move that I think would be a financially wise move, mirroring what they just did with Tim Jernigan, and not to get into the rabbit hole, but I think it could be Alshon Jeffrey, because I think that if you take care of Alshon Jeffrey now and you look at what he's done over the last 2 weeks, he's heating up. He's performing like that number one wide receiver statistically in terms of touchdowns. And as you touched on after the game, the catch he made on that fourth down touchdown from Carson Wentz, he's going to command a lot more money on the open market in free agency if you allow him to get there than he might if you can get him when he's feeling good, playing for a 9-1 team, playing for Wentz, when the memory of that Dallas game and the last couple of weeks where he's really started to heat up in terms of touchdowns is fresh in his mind. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that if they extend one more player, that it's Alshon Jeffrey.
Yeah, and I mean, look, like you said, I don't want to get into the debate again, but I've always said he's a guy that I think I would bring back at the right price, because I think he's a good locker room guy. He's a good receiver. Just, the debate about number one, whatever. But that was a number one type receiver catch he made against the Cowboys. So it wouldn't surprise me. I think he wants to be here. Probably the number one question, and I'm sure you get it a lot too on Twitter, is, do you think Alshon will take less? Do you think he'll, come back here? And saying he'll take less depends on what the market, we all thought he would get more than $9 million for 1 year. So did he take less to come here? I don't think he did. I think he just took what the market dictated. So bearing what the market dictates, I do think he will. His priority, in my opinion, is going to be to come back to the Eagles. Whether that means he'll take, $5 or $6 million less over a life of a contract, maybe, I'm not sure. But before the season, I think I would have said he's only here for the money. He's here because he wants to increase his value, and then he'll go to the highest bidder. I don't feel that's the case anymore.
See, I still think that's if he gets to the offseason, I don't think you're going to be able to get him for a song, right? I don't think that if you allow this to go to free agency and you have a team like Minnesota come out and throw a bunch of money at him, or you have a team like maybe the Patriots who just want to keep reloading around a 40-year-old Tom Brady, or maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think there's going to be a market, and I don't know, admittedly, the cap situation for these teams, but I think there's going to be a number one wide receiver contract waiting for Alshon Jeffrey based on what he's done this year, and we still have 7 games left. So I think there's a chance that his production could go up even further. So if I'm the Eagles, that's not a risk that I'm willing to take. Could he take less money to stay here? Sure, absolutely. But then that kind of leaves you to wonder why he only took a 1-year deal this year. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If I'm going to bet on myself and only take a 1-year deal, it's so that the following off season I can cash in. It's not so I can take less money and then take less money over a long-term contract.
The only thing I'll say is, and admittedly, I think Alshon's been a tough guy to get to know in the locker room. He's not super vocal,
He
even,
was on Sunday.
yeah, he was on Sunday. That's true. But I mean, just in general at the locker, he's not super vocal in interviews. He's not extremely like super vocal just to chat with. But I will say he does kind of strike me as a guy that would like to, doesn't want to like move again and do all this. He seems like he's genuinely happy. He seems like a very like, and I don't mean this as an insult, just like a simple type guy. He enjoys
Sure.
what he enjoys. And I think he likes being here. So I do think that is going to factor in. I don't think, he's going to be drawn into the idea of like, let me take an extra money, but I'm going to go to Cleveland. Like, I think he's made a lot of money. So we'll see. But to get into my guy that I think is going to be him, and I think you probably agree, but I think it might be Nigel Bradham. To start,
Yeah.
he has the same agent as Jernigan. 2, you lost Jordan Hicks for the season, obviously with his Achilles, and who knows what he'll be like when he comes back. Who knows when he'll be ready, all those things. So there's that to factor in. And 3, he's played really well this year. So I think when you take all those when you factor all those in, I think he makes a lot of sense for a guy the Eagles will not want to risk losing, because now that Hicks is gone, you need him a lot more. And he's been an integral part of the defense. He's a Jim Schwartz guy. So
and he's a
that's
Florida
my
State guy too. He brings that Florida State attitude that Tim Jernigan brings and Ronald Darby brings, and I think that that's kind of a reflection of the type of defense that Jim Schwartz wants to play, and we're seeing that really come to fruition right now. I'm with you. If it's Nigel Bradham, I don't think anybody's going to complain about that, because, like you pointed out, they're paper thin at linebacker, not just behind Jordan Hicks, but to the point where they needed to go and bring Donnell Ellerbe off the street because they weren't comfortable with the Najee Goods, Camus Grugier-Hills, Nathan Gary, and the guys that they had backing up Hicks and Bradham. So I agree. I think that there's a chance it could be Nigel Bradham. And if it is, then you're looking at Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas really making a concerted effort to build a balanced team, because there's no doubt, and we've touched on this a little bit before, that you wanted to bring in some veterans around Carson Wentz, but you also wanted playmakers on offense around Carson Wentz. I think you have that now with Alshon, with Jay Ajayi, LeGarrette Blount. Corey Clement is emerging as the type of running back who could probably start for at least two of the teams in the NFC East right now at running back. Offensive line is, not just marginally good, but very good to potentially great, even without Jason Peters. But if you keep Nigel Bradham in the middle of this defense, you probably have the best defensive line in football, a secondary that with a healthy Sidney Jones and a healthy Ronald Darby to start the year is probably a top 5 or top 10 secondary in football. And with Hicks and Bradham out there, it's a complete defense that you're kind of setting the foundation, at least for your starting 22, to be a really good team for the foreseeable future.
All right, so I want to get into the questions people submitted, but very briefly, I'm not sure how much this will interest people, but let's talk about the kicker situation briefly, and then we'll get into the questions. So we have a lot of
I think it might interest people a lot. I've gotten a lot of questions on Twitter, even yesterday sitting at the airport when Doug basically put the news out there. But no, I don't think anybody really knows on Tuesday what the latest is on Jake Elliott.
Well, to me, it seems pretty straightforward. I think he'll be cleared of his concussion by the game next week, and he'll play. That's just my guess. I mean,
if he's cleared, sure. But I never know with concussion.
No, yeah, you do never know. That's true. But I will say, I don't know. He has a week to get over it. He did play afterwards for a little bit. I don't know. I mean, we're like you said, it's all kind of a shot in the dark at this point. I'm not going to pretend to know, what his ability to return from a concussion is. But I do think he's probably going to play. But the question is, if he's not ready, and you're the Eagles, what do? I guess you activate Sturgis, and then I'm assuming you don't cut Eliot, so you carry 2 kickers on the roster. And then the interesting part of that is if Sturgis kicks well, because let's be honest, Jake Elliott hasn't kicked that well recently. He's missed 3 extra points over the last 2 or 3 games. He missed a field goal, or not
chip shot field goal on Sunday night. Yeah.
Right. So the question is, let's just for argument's sake say he's not ready to play, because I think we both agree if he's ready, he'll just go out there and play. Let's say he's not ready. What do you do?
Well, I'd have to look over the bottom of the roster again, but I think that the plan, if I'm the Eagles, would be to carry 2 kickers. And it's not unheard of. There are teams that have a kickoff kicker and a field goal kicker, and maybe that winds up being what you do even when Jake Elliott gets healthy, because I think he has a longer leg, but Sturgis seems to be a little bit more accurate, at least in the short term. I don't think he carried 2 kickers all the way through a potential Super Bowl run.
No.
But I think that at least to get through this week against the Bears, I don't think you can feel confident waiting until Friday and being like, oh, well, guess what? Jake Elliott is still feeling effects of the concussion. He's
Right.
still not cleared from the protocol. Camus, you're up again. No, I think you have to activate Sturgis if he's healthy, get through this week, and then reevaluate it going
Well,
into
let me throw this by you. Think they would just go without a kicker?
Well, then Doug
I mean, you're
kind of
playing the
talked about it
Bears.
yesterday, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're playing the Bears. You were really successful on 2-point conversions. Camus grew Hill for what it's worth, did a fine job on kickoffs. I don't think they would actually go without a kicker, but like, is it that crazy to think? Because I'm looking at the bottom of the roster here. So maybe Ellerby, since no one else signed him, you're probably confident no one will pick him up. That could be one option. Will Beatty maybe, but like,
Yeah.
I don't think they cut Sudfeld because someone
No.
tried to sign him off the practice squad. So they're probably going to lose him. They're not going to cut a running back. They're not going to cut Gibson, I don't think. So it's tough to find guys they would cut. And I mean, in theory, you should blow the Bears out. Now, maybe it sets a bad, thing if that's what the team's mindset is. But I don't know. I mean,
So here's the
if I
one.
told you they weren't going in without a kicker, would you
Right.
predict any differently for the game?
No, I don't think that I would predict any differently for the game, but I will say this. Number one, I think that gives the Bears all kinds of bulletin board material. And I know that only means so much because
Right.
the Bears have a rookie quarterback who just doesn't seem like he's ready and a defense that's been a sieve of late. But number two, let's just say it's close. Let's just say that the
Right,
Eagles
it's need a
bury
kicker.
themselves in another slow start, and for whatever reason, whether the Bears stack the box and to stop the run, or they knock Carson Wentz around, or God forbid he goes out with some sort of injury, and it comes down to a kick late, and you don't have a kicker. Doug Peterson would be run out of town on a rail if he lost the game because they
Yeah.
couldn't attempt a 35-yard field goal.
Yeah, that's true. I do think. Yeah, I mean, they're probably not going to go without a kicker. I just thought it was interesting.
Well, I don't
yeah.
think it's that far off of a suggestion. I think that there might even be as high as a 30% chance that they don't have a kicker on Sunday. But the reality is, I think that anything can happen in the NFL. It's a week-to-week league, and the Eagles do have a game against Seattle looming, so you worry about a little bit of that trap game look-ahead element. Maybe not to lose, but maybe that it could be closer than you expect. I just don't know that you really limit yourself by not doing something like activating Sturgis and putting Eliot either on short-term IR or cutting Will Beatty. He wasn't active on Sunday night, so it's not like
Right.
you brought him in here and he was active to play on game day. You
And I
can
don't
get
think people are
by
going to
by
pick him
dropping
up.
Will Beatty and then bringing him back up.
Yeah, and the interesting part of that would be then, if Sturgis kicks well, what do you do then? But I guess that's something we'll debate when it happens. Let's get into
Yeah.
these questions. All right,
Let's do
so
it.
I'll start it off. These are emails. We appreciate everyone that emailed. This one's from Dr. Seuss 1182, and he
Love
says,
the Dr. Seuss reference.
Yeah,
by the
there
way.
you
That's
go.
Great.
This team has that Eagles 04 team feeling, except better all-around playmakers at all positions. So I will agree. I mean, I wasn't around the 04 team. I watched them, but I wasn't around them. I agree this team absolutely has a special feeling to it. There's no denying that. Better all-around playmakers at all positions, a little strong to me. I mean, I think Terrell Owens is probably better than
Probably
any
a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, probably better than anyone the Eagles has a receiver. Brian Westbrook, I think, is probably better than any running back.
Fringe Hall of Famer. Yep.
Right. McNabb, I mean, Wentz is playing pretty amazing, but that was also McNabb's best season of his career,
Yep.
and he's probably a fringe Hall of Famer too. So,
Yep.
I now look. I mean, Wentz is probably your best argument. But then even on defense, I mean, Brian Dawkins, they had really good secondary members. So the defensive line is probably better on on this team than it was in 04, but the 04 defense line was pretty good too. So
Yeah, I got into a really extensive Twitter debate with people about a couple weeks ago about this, and I think that the two positions you can point to and say that the 2017 team is demonstrably better is defensive line and tight end. I think that across the board, otherwise, it's either pretty much a push at quarterback, and I think you give the edge to 2004 in all the other spots.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's get into the next one because I think that seems pretty. But I mean,
Sure.
look, we both agreed something special going on here, so I don't think it's that crazy of an email.
No, and I think that the Eagles are undoubtedly the team to beat in the NFC and maybe the NFL, depending on what happens in Foxborough. Pete Q from Los Angeles says, Dak might have stunk, but the secondary has been awesome and is even better with Darby back. Lots of passion and effort from those guys. It's a lot of fun to watch. What is this team's actual weakness? Eliot, you and I debated that and talked about that with Les Bowen and Paul Domowitch on the elevator ride out of AT&T Stadium. I'd love to get your take on what you think the weaknesses of this team, because I'm kind of racking my brain and it's been hard to actually settle in on one.
So I did an article kind of listing 5 things that they would have to work on. And to be honest, it was really hard to come up with 5. And one of them was just clinching home field advantage. So it is tough. But here's the 2 I came up with. One we touched on was the kicking situation. Just because, look, I'm not saying they got lucky with Jake Elliott, but switching a kicker is risky business in the NFL. And especially for a team that in theory is going to be playing playoff games, which I'm assuming won't be blowouts, you're going to need a kicker. So that's one. The other one I would say is, and this isn't like a huge thing, but I think it's one of their weaknesses, is the production Torrey Smith is giving them on the other side. And I know he just had a touchdown against the Cowboys, but he has not played very well this season. He's struggling with drops. And if Alshon continues to really heat up, look, I mean, Torrey Smith, even though he's a starting receiver on the outside, he's still pretty low down the totem pole when it comes to offensive weapons here. I mean, there's Alshon, Aguilar, all the running backs, Ertz. So, I mean, it's not a huge deal, but when you play these better teams in the playoffs with better defenses and better defensive coordinators, you might need Torrey Smith to step up and make a big catch. And at this point, I don't think you can confidently say he'll make it, just because not only did he struggle with drops this year, he struggled with drops last year too. So this isn't like a fluke thing. I mean, he has issues catching the ball, and he's a starting player. So I think
eventually you're going to slide Mac Hollins into that spot. Eventually, maybe not this year.
But that's not this year. Yeah.
Right. I think that if you're looking to identify weaknesses, the kicker spot is obviously one. Number 2, maybe the interior of your offensive line, but Jason Kelce has played about as well as anybody can expect him to
Brandon
play.
Brooks,
and Brandon Brooks. And Stefan Wisniewski has more than held his own since he's been thrust into action due to ineffectiveness from Isaac Seumalo. So I really don't know what this team's overall weakness is, especially when you compare it to the rest of the NFL, when you have elite quarterbacks that are hurt. You have Odell Beckham Jr. hurt. You have David Johnson who's hurt. And I was talking about this actually with my dad last night, that this might be their best chance to go and win the Super Bowl because of what's happened around the rest of the league. And as well as they're playing right now and as well as they're built, I think that next year the competition gets a lot stiffer and a lot tougher if you don't see this outbreak of injuries to so many key players. Look, the Packers are irrelevant without Aaron Rodgers. They're probably right there with the Eagles if he's healthy. Arizona's season was torpedoed when they lost David Johnson. It changed the way they had to play offense. Carson Palmer gets hurt. They're essentially eliminated. You look on the other side of the ledger and you look at the injuries in the AFC. I just think the path is right there for the Eagles taking. And this might be, in terms of talent, in terms of Wentz, in terms of the rest of the league, this might be their best chance that they've had and might have for a while to actually go and get it done.
Yeah, and I think if we're just not talking X's and O's, I think their biggest actual weakness is their lack of playoff experience. That, to me, when I think about like, why won't this team make the Super Bowl? I don't think it's because of Torrey Smith or because of, I think the reason they don't make the Super Bowl is because their lack of playoff experience. So I would say that's the team's actual biggest weakness, in my opinion. So the next question, and this is one that fans, I get a ton of these. There's nothing to do with this season. I think fans are just super intrigued by it. Wesley Parker, given our depth at corner and lack of picks, round 2 and 3, the Eagles don't have a pick next year. Do you think we dangle someone as trade bait this offseason? It's a tough question because you're not trading Darby. You're not trading Sidney Jones. You're not trading Rasul Douglas. Patrick Robinson's a free agent. I don't know if he'll be back. So the obvious answer there is Jalen Mills. But, and I'll actually scoop this next one in there too, because Anthony Amatucci wrote a whole lot and we really appreciate it. But one of the things he said was Ronald Darby might be the most talented corner on the roster, but for some reason, Mills keeps making number 1 corner plays and should remain the starter even after Jones plays. So Jalen Mills is a very interesting question. I've always been high on Jalen Mills, so I mean, you're not gonna hear me saying that they should bench him. I think he should play. One thing I took away though from, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, maybe 2 or 3, or it was 2 weeks. It was during the bye week. We got a chance to sit down and talk to the position coaches, and just talking to Corey Undlin, he didn't say it. I'm just kind of like reading between the lines. To me, it sounds like what Corey Undlin likes from a nickel corner, Jalen Mills brings. So I think that's kind of a natural transition. I mean, look, Patrick Robinson's played phenomenal. There's no denying that. I mean, maybe they bring him back, but I think you're looking at Darby and Jones on the outside and Mills at the nickel. So
look who's coming around. Look who's coming around.
What else are you going to do? What else are you going to do? I mean,
you don't bring Patrick Robinson back, which is what I've been saying for 2 months, right?
Look, I think if I were the Eagles, I'd bring him back because I think, but I mean, he might get paid more so then the Eagles willing to pay number one.
If you want Jalen Mills on the field, I think he only has two homes in this secondary next year, either playing safety, and you're not going to walk away from Malcolm Jenkins or Rodney McLeod, or playing nickel. And Corey Undlin, gushing about his ability to play slot corner, playing the nickel role. I think that kind of gives you a hint of which way they're leaning. And we saw Ronald Darby play about as well as you can as a cornerback against Des Bryant or any receiver on Sunday night. So I think it's essentially going to be your number 1 and 2 corners next year on the outside are Darby and Jones, with Mills sliding in the inside. And that's a damn good secondary. And I think
but the only counter I'll make to that is, as talented as we both think Sidney Jones is, I mean, Jalen Mills has done nothing to lose his job as a starting outside receiver. Can we agree with that? I mean, he's played very well. He stepped up in big spots. And I do think his personality of the team is very important. So, although I do think he will slide in the nickel just because Sidney Jones is really good. And, I think he's more natural.
You have to get the best players on the field. And I think that's kind of what we saw with Darby coming back. And we talked about this all leading up to the game on Sunday night, that what do you do about Jalen Mills? What do you do about Rasul Douglas, who's played well? How does Patrick
That's the other thing. Rasul Douglas has played well, too. We didn't even mention him. But
yeah, but I mean, look, it's a good problem to have, is it not? It's a good problem to have.
Unless you're Rasul Douglas and you're sitting on the bench every week. I'm just saying, I mean, they're not going to be able to keep long-term all of these guys. So the question is, do you dangle one and trade him? I just don't see a natural trade candidate, because I don't think
so either, because you weaken the depth on your team. And that's one of the things that the reason why the Eagles manhandled the Cowboys is because they have a deep roster the Cowboys don't. You wrote about that on Monday morning. And I think that you look at the talent in the secondary. If you can have 4 quality starting cornerbacks, that's an insurance policy on injury. And in today's NFL, when teams are spreading defenses wide and running 3-4 wide receiver sets, that third cornerback, just because he's not guarding the outside part of the field, I don't think Jalen Mills would take it as a slight that he's defending the interior part, the slot, as long as he's on the field, because you're still playing, right? You're still playing a key role on a defense. And as far as Douglas goes, hey, if Sidney Jones doesn't shred his knee during his pro day, you can make a case that he goes in the top 10 or 15 picks in the draft. So I don't think that it's any slight as far as his talent goes that Rasul Douglas winds up on the bench for Sidney Jones.
No, I agree. So the next question we'll get into, we touched on Sidney Jones a little. Really quick before we get into the next one, which is about Jay Ajayi. Dennis Keister wrote, here's my prediction for Sidney Jones. With no injuries to Eagles defensive backs, Eagles will begin having Sidney practicing before the Super Bowl. Dennis, I appreciate the email, but there's no way Sidney Jones' first game is going to be in the Super Bowl. I don't even think that's legally allowed. I think he would have to be activated at some point. I'm starting to think Sidney doesn't play this year.
I agree. And, we go back to before the draft, and I know that I've been saying all along I've been more surprised if he didn't play versus if he did. But that's when we didn't realize how dominant this secondary would be. They don't need him. They don't need to rush him back. And I think that that's one of the great positive consequences of Ronald Darby playing as well as he did on Sunday, of Rasul Douglas holding his own, Patrick Robinson being a surprise in the slot, Jalen Mills being at an all-pro level. You don't have to rush Sidney Jones back. You don't have to bring him back when he's 90 or 95% or even 100% healthy with only 1 or 2 weeks of practice. You can bring him back week 1 next year, 100% healthy with a full off season of practice training, a year of sitting in meetings. So he has that extra year of scheme knowledge going into his quote unquote rookie season in 2018. So based on how well this secondary is playing and where we are with Sidney Jones, barring some sort of calamity with 1 or 2 corners getting hurt, I don't think we see him playing this year.
Agreed. All right, so let's get into. We have some tweets I want to get into.
Yep.
Kind of, we talked about these a little bit. I'll fly through them real quick. At Wank Leezy, Jay Ajayi did not get enough touches even after he had a 71-yard run. Also, what's Lil Wayne's best mixtape? Well, obviously his best mixtape is Dedication 3, but Jay Ajayi will. I disagree he didn't get enough touches. Just watching the game, I never thought to myself, we got to get Ajayi out there more. I think this team is going with a balanced running attack. I don't think they want Jay Ajayi right now to touch the ball 20, 25 times a game. Now, they
don't want anybody to touch the ball.
Right. And there might be a game where that ends up happening just because of the way it plays out. But I didn't think, even after a 71-yard run, I didn't think that he needed more touches.
No, I agree. And I wrote about this yesterday, and I think the Eagles have a great thing going right now in this backfield by committee, and we can all talk about Wentz, we can all talk about the defense, but you look at what they did against Denver, you look at what they did this past game, you look at what they did the previous week in the second half against the 49ers when they really decided to run the ball to keep that pass rush at bay. The running game is really a lot of what's powering this Super Bowl run. And if you talk about playing home games in the Northeast, home playoff games where it's going to be 10 degrees outside, maybe snowing, could be sleet, freezing rain in those elements, you're going to want to be able to run the ball. And outside of maybe New Orleans, I don't know that there's a team in the NFL right now running the ball as effectively as the Eagles are. They're the number 2 ground attack in the league behind the Jaguars, who Jaguars are going to host a playoff game and maybe more than that in the AFC. Go look at their schedule, go look at what they're doing. But from an Eagles standpoint, to be able to run the ball as well as they are and have all these guys happy and buying in. I mean, you had Kenyon Barner joking around about LeGarrette Blount being Corey Clement's father in the locker room after the game, right? They're on, Facebook Live and Instagram stories from the locker room joking around. Even Jay Ajayi, who was labeled kind of a quote-unquote meat-first player by the Dolphins after they traded him, I mean, he's in there saying, hey, I've done with this before, and all I care about is winning. I love winning. I don't think that the Eagles really want or need to give any of these guys 20 touches a game. And I think you got to give a little bit of a tip of the cap to Deuce Staley for crafting this running back rotation and getting all of these guys happy, buying in, and succeeding.
So the next one, to keep with the running back situation, at Ryan Anderson 29, how does Corey Clement's continued effectiveness impact the Eagles' backfield beyond the 2017 season? I think he's your number 2 running back next year. Depending what happens with LeGarrette Blount, but I think Wendell Smallwood's gone. Donald Pumphrey, maybe he makes a team, but even if he does, I think that's going to be more as a pass-catching back. And I am skeptical he will. But I think Corey Clement is going to be a big part of this offense in beyond 2017, and I think he's going to be the number 2 back behind Ajayi next year. All this guy does is produce. One of my favorite stats with this team right now, and I've tweeted it a bunch, is in Corey Clement's last 23 games going back to Wisconsin, he's 21 touchdowns. So, This guy just knows how to find the end zone. We debated him a lot in training camp with other Eagles writers, and yeah, he might not have an elite type skill in terms of like speed or looseness or anything like that, but he just knows how to play. So I think he's going to be a big part of the offense next year.
I agree. And I think that the combination of, look, we've already seen Corey Clement surpass and supplant Wendell Smallwood as the running back who's active on game day, right? We've seen him score 4 touchdowns over the last 2 games. As you said, he's done a really nice job of finding the end zone, whether it's as a pass catcher or as a runner. I think 2 things in terms of trading for Ajayi and bringing in Corey Clement. You now don't have to force feed a running back pick, right? You don't need to draft Darius Guice out of LSU at number 1 in the first round. You don't have to maybe mildly reach for Nick Chubb out of Georgia in the first round. You can get a quality running back, as we've seen teams around the league, like a Kareem Hunt. You can get a running back in round 3 or round 4 even. I don't think that you need to peg running back as your biggest draft need because of what you gotten from Corey Clement. It's kind of amazing when you think about it, the production he had at Wisconsin and his tape and his skill set that he even went undrafted in the first place. And now you have him in there. He's young, he's homegrown, and you have Ajayi. I'm with you. I think not only is he your number 2 back, but now you can focus on quote unquote force feeding a offensive tackle pick, quote unquote force feeding a linebacker pick, not necessarily reaching for guys, but those 2 positions can and should be your top priority.
Yeah. And not to get into this now, but I do think the Eagles, when the first round comes around next year, because they don't have a second, 3rd round pick, I'm not saying you take a 3rd round prospect at, whatever they end up picking, like 28, 29 or 32 maybe. But I think you do draft for need just because you don't have the 2nd, 3rd round picks and your roster is so deep. But the last one, we already talked about it, so we don't have to get back into it, but I just wanted to give him a shout out at Awesome Sauce 86. He's always tweeting us. He
loves the show.
He loves the show. Yeah, I love it. So I just wanted to give him a shout out, but we already talked about the kicker situation. So as you know how we feel about that. So that'll wrap that up. Thanks everyone for listening. If you already listened for this long, we'd really appreciate if you give us a 5-star review. You just go in whatever app you want. We're on iTunes, Spreaker, Google Play, SoundCloud, and give us that 5-star review. We really appreciate it. We'll be back on Friday with a preview. We'll be back on Friday with a preview pod. Although with Thanksgiving, we'll have to figure out our schedule. So
we'll make it work. Friday is we have to get those 5-star reviews read. Yeah. We got to get up to 500 by playoffs, right? Wasn't that the goal?
That is the goal. That was the goal. That's true. So, all right. So we will have one for you on Friday about previewing the Chicago Bears, which I think we'll both agree now is going to be a win. But and then hopefully next Tuesday, Joe is back, and we will be talking about another Eagles win. Matt, I will talk to you later.
Talk to you Friday. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah, great Thanksgiving, everyone. Talk to you guys later.